My name is Carter Williams. I'm 39 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was a normal guy with a normal life. I worked as a wildlife photographer, specializing in the wetland ecosystems of northern Florida. I had a small house on the outskirts of Jacksonville, a decent truck, and a reputation for capturing images that other photographers couldn't. I was known for venturing into remote areas and staying out later than most, chasing that perfect twilight shot when the swamp comes alive. That was before everything changed, before I became both hunter and hunted. It started on a muggy Tuesday evening in late October. I'd been tracking reports of an unusual predator in the Okefenokee swamp that was leaving behind strange kills, deer carcasses torn apart with surgical precision, but also with marks that didn't match any known predator in the region. As a photographer who had made a career documenting Florida wildlife, I was intrigued. Game wardens were baffled, and local hunters were spreading wild theories. I figured it was probably just a large alligator with an unusual hunting pattern, or maybe even a released exotic pet, a python or monitor lizard. Either way, I was determined to be the one to capture it on film. I packed my gear that morning, 2 Canon DSLRs with telephoto lenses, a collection of motion-activated trail cameras, camping supplies, and enough food for 3 days. I told my sister I'd be off-grid until Friday and set out for the southeastern edge of the swamp, where the most recent kill had been found. The drive took me through increasingly remote back roads. The asphalt eventually gave way to gravel and then to packed dirt as I wound deeper into the swamp. By late afternoon, I'd reached my destination, a small clearing about a half-mile from the water's edge, where I could set up a base camp. I parked my truck, unloaded my gear, and began establishing my campsite. The October sun was setting earlier each day, and I worked quickly to set up my tent and organize my equipment before darkness fell. After securing the camp, I grabbed one camera, a powerful flashlight, and my GPS unit, and headed toward the location of the most recent kill, hoping to set up some trail cameras before night fully descended. The evening air hung heavy with humidity as I trudged through the underbrush. Cypress trees loomed overhead, their branches draped with Spanish moss that swayed gently in the occasional breeze. As I moved deeper into the swamp, the normal sounds of wildlife, the croaking of frogs, the distant call of birds, seemed to diminish, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd been in countless swamps and marshes throughout my career. I was comfortable in these environments, but something about this place felt wrong. Different. The air seemed thicker, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I attributed it to the stories of the strange predator, my imagination working overtime as daylight faded. When I reached the coordinates where the last deer carcass had been found, the area had been picked clean by scavengers. Only a few scattered bones and tufts of fur remained. I set up 3 trail cameras in a triangular pattern around the site, angling them to capture any movement in the area. As I was mounting the last camera, I noticed something odd in the mud nearby, a footprint unlike any I'd seen before. It was large, almost twice the size of my boot, with what appeared to be claw marks extending from where toes would be. But it wasn't a bear print. The shape was all wrong, more elongated, almost like a human foot but distorted. I took several photos of it before the encroaching darkness made photography impossible without artificial light. By the time I finished, night had fully fallen. I switched on my flashlight and began making my way back to camp, moving carefully through the dense undergrowth. The beam of light cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The silence had deepened, unnaturally so. Even the insects had gone quiet. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound that didn't belong in these woods, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, sweeping my flashlight in a slow arc around me, seeing nothing but trees and shadows. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "Anyone there?" No response, just the dying echo of my own voice. Then came a crashing sound from the brush about 30 yards to my right, something large moving through the undergrowth at speed. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned toward the noise, the beam of my flashlight dancing wildly as my hand began to shake. For just a moment, the light caught a glimpse of something moving, something tall, covered in dark fur, running on what looked like two legs. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond my light's reach. Its face was the worst part, somewhere between a wolf and something else, with a long muzzle full of teeth and eyes that reflected the headlights like yellow lamps. Its front limbs ended in what looked like hands, but with long, curved claws. "Jesus Christ," Bill whispered from the driver's seat. For a long moment, the creature just stared at us through the windshield. Then it dropped to all fours and charged. Bill threw the bus into gear and swerved hard to the right, narrowly missing the creature. We fishtailed on the gravel shoulder, then lurched back onto the asphalt. People were screaming now, grabbing onto seats as Bill accelerated as fast as the old bus could go. "What was that thing?" someone shouted. "A bear," suggested another voice. I knew it wasn't a bear. I'd photographed bears in the wild many times. This was something else entirely. "Everyone stay calm." Sarah was trying to regain control of the situation. "We're safe in the bus. We'll get to the next town and—" Her words were cut off by a terrible sound, claws scraping along the roof of the bus. The creature was on top of us. Bill swerved again, trying to shake it off, but the scratching continued. Then the emergency hatch in the roof began to buckle inward, metal groaning as something powerful pulled at it. "Bill, faster!" I shouted. The bus was already doing over 70, rattling dangerously on the uneven road. Bill was white-knuckling the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The hatch gave way with a screech of torn metal. Cold air rushed in, along with a massive, clawed hand that groped blindly, trying to find purchase. "Get down!" I yelled, and everyone ducked into the aisle between the seats. Then abruptly, the clawing stopped. The creature had either fallen off or jumped away. Bill kept driving, his breathing heavy. "I think it's gone," someone said after a minute of silence. I wasn't convinced. I peered out the windows, searching the darkness. The desert night rushed past, illuminated only by our headlights and the quarter moon overhead. "There," a man pointed ahead. "Something's in the road." Bill saw it too late. A dark shape stood directly in our path. He slammed on the brakes, but we were going too fast. The bus skidded, tires screaming on asphalt. The impact threw me forward into the seat in front of me. There was a sickening thud, and the bus veered off the road, tilting as it hit the embankment. For a moment, I thought we might roll over, but somehow Bill managed to bring us to a stop, half on and half off the highway. The silence that followed was broken only by whimpers and the hissing of the bus's damaged radiator. Steam rose from the hood in the headlights' glare. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah's voice was shaking. People started answering, some crying, others in shock. I pulled myself up using the seat back, feeling a sharp pain in my ribs where I'd hit it. "Did we hit it?" someone asked. Bill was staring straight ahead through the cracked windshield. "I think so," he said quietly. I made my way to the front of the bus. Through the spider-webbed glass, I could see the road was empty. "Where did it go?" I asked. As if in answer, a low growl came from beneath the bus. Then came a scraping sound, like claws on metal. "It's under us," Bill whispered. Before anyone could react, the bus lurched violently to one side. Metal screamed as something tore at the undercarriage. We were being lifted, the entire front end of the bus rising a foot off the ground, then dropping back with a crash that threw us all off balance again. "The emergency exit!" Sarah shouted, pointing to the back of the bus. "Everyone, move!" People began scrambling toward the rear, crawling along the aisle in panic. I helped an older woman who had fallen, pulling her along with me. The bus rocked again, harder this time. The creature was trying to flip us over. "Hurry!" Bill had abandoned the driver's seat and was helping people toward the exit. I reached the back of the bus and helped Sarah open the emergency door. Cold night air rushed in. Outside was nothing but dark desert, the highway barely visible in the distance where the bus had veered off. "We can't go out there," a woman protested. "That thing is out there." "It's under the bus right now," I said, "and I don't think this bus is going to protect us much longer." As if to prove my point, the entire vehicle shifted again, metal groaning as it tilted further off the road. "We need to make a run for it," Bill said. "There's a maintenance station about a mile up the road. If we stay together—" A thunderous impact cut him off as the creature slammed into the side of the bus again. This time, a window shattered, showering glass over the passengers. Someone screamed. I looked out through the broken window and saw it. The creature was circling the bus, moving with unnatural speed on all fours. Ancient markings covered portions of the walls, symbols I didn't recognize, alongside crude depictions of what appeared to be human-animal hybrids. In the center of the chamber lay a disturbing collection of bones, some animal, some disturbingly human-like. They had been arranged in a precise pattern around a central depression in the floor. The depression itself contained a dark substance that looked horribly like dried blood. I photographed everything, moving carefully around the chamber. In one corner, I found what appeared to be personal items, tattered clothing, a wallet, a woman's purse. With shaking hands, I opened the wallet and found a driver's license belonging to a Michael Krantz from Fargo, North Dakota. The license was dated just 3 months earlier. The purse contained identification for Elaine Chambers from Jacksonville. According to her driver's license, she was 27 years old. A student ID card indicated she attended the University of North Florida. The license was issued just last year. These people had been here, in this cave, recently, and something told me they hadn't left alive. My hands trembled as I replaced the items exactly as I'd found them. This was now a potential crime scene, and I needed to alert the authorities. I backed out of the cave, nearly running in my haste to distance myself from what I discovered. The return journey to my campsite seemed to take forever, each shadow in the swamp now pregnant with threat. By the time I reached my truck, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the mild temperature. I threw my equipment into the back and sped away, not stopping until I reached the main road, where I finally had cell reception again. I called the county sheriff's office reporting what I'd found. The dispatcher seemed skeptical, but took down the GPS coordinates I provided for the cave. They promised to send deputies to investigate and took my contact information. I considered my obligation fulfilled and pointed my truck toward Jacksonville, eager to put distance between myself and the swamp. That should have been the end of it. I should have gone home, processed my photographs, and waited for the authorities to contact me. Instead, I made the first in a series of decisions that would ultimately lead me to the nightmare I now find myself living. Instead of going straight home, I drove to the local newspaper office. I had a contact there, a journalist named Rebecca Torres, who occasionally purchased my wildlife photos for feature stories. I showed her some of the images I'd captured, the strange footprints, the mutilated deer, the cave with its disturbing contents, and told her about my experience. Rebecca was immediately intrigued. Unlike the sheriff's dispatcher, she didn't question my story or my sanity. Instead, she began pulling up old news articles on her computer. Stories about disappearances in and around the Okefenokee Swamp going back decades. Most were attributed to people getting lost, drowning, or being taken by alligators. But the pattern she revealed was disturbing. Clusters of disappearances every few years, often in the same areas, with most of the bodies never recovered. "This is big, Carter," she said, her eyes bright with the excitement of a potential breakthrough story. "If you've found something that connects these cases..." She proposed a joint investigation, her journalistic skills combined with my knowledge of the swamp and photographic evidence. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We decided to wait a day to see if the sheriff's department took any action, then returned to the site together to gather more evidence before going public with the story. That night, alone in my house, I downloaded the photos from my camera to my computer. Most were what I expected: the footprints, the killed deer, the cave, and its contents. But as I scrolled through the images, I came across one that made my blood freeze. It was from the previous night, taken during one of the moments when I thought I'd seen eyes reflecting in the darkness at the edge of my campsite. I'd pointed my camera in that direction and snapped several photos, seeing nothing at the time. But the camera had captured what my eyes had missed. There, at the edge of the firelight, partially hidden behind a cypress tree, stood a figure. It was tall, at least 7 feet. And though mostly in shadow, what was visible made no sense to my rational mind. It appeared to be covered in dark fur, with a torso that was almost human in shape, but with proportions that were wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too broad. The head was obscured by shadow, but what little I could see suggested a muzzle rather than a human face. I stared at the image for a long time, trying to convince myself it was a trick of light and shadow, or perhaps a bear standing on its hind legs. But I knew better. The stance was too deliberate, the positioning too calculating. Whatever this was, it had been watching me, studying me. I sent the image to Rebecca with a brief message explaining when and where it was taken. Her response came minutes later. "What the hell is that?" I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife on the table beside me, jumping at every sound from outside. By morning, I'd convinced myself that returning to the swamp was madness. I called Rebecca to back out of our plan, but she was adamant. "The sheriff's office called me back," she said. "They sent 2 deputies to the coordinates you gave them. They found nothing, Carter. No cave, no bones, nothing unusual at all." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I can show them exactly where it is." "They want you to," she replied. "They've asked if you'll guide a search team back to the location. I told them we'd go together." The implication was clear. Without me guiding them directly to the cave, the authorities weren't taking the situation seriously. And if I refused, I would look like either a prankster or a lunatic. My professional reputation would be ruined. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet Rebecca and 2 sheriff's deputies the following morning to lead them back to the cave. That day passed with excruciating slowness. I spent hours examining the photos again, researching local folklore, and trying to make sense of what I'd encountered. The Oak of Fenneky had its share of legends, stories of strange creatures and unexplained phenomena, but most were clearly tall tales meant to scare children or entertain tourists. However, I did find references to older legends, Native American stories about shapeshifters and skinwalkers, beings that could transform between human and animal form. According to some accounts, the remote areas of the swamp had once been used for rituals by shamans who sought to commune with these entities or even become them. I dismissed these stories as superstition, but the image on my computer screen defied rational explanation. Whatever I had photographed was real, and it was dangerous. The mutilated deer and the human remains in the cave were evidence of that. As night fell, I found myself constantly checking the locks on my doors and windows, peering out into the darkness of my yard, imagining shapes moving among the trees at the property line. Just after midnight, I heard something on my front porch, a scratching sound, followed by what sounded like heavy breathing. I approached the door silently, knife in hand, but couldn't bring myself to look outside. The sounds continued for several minutes before stopping abruptly. In the morning, I found deep gouges in my front door, 4 parallel lines carved into the wood, too high to have been made by any normal animal. Below them on the welcome mat lay a dead rabbit, its chest cavity opened and emptied of organs. I should have canceled the expedition back to the swamp then and there. I should have packed a bag and driven far away from Jacksonville. Instead, I took photos of the door and the rabbit, then cleaned up the grisly offering, telling myself it could have been a disturbed individual playing a prank after hearing rumors of my findings. When Rebecca arrived with 2 sheriff's deputies, a heavy-set veteran named Grimes and a younger officer named Wilcox, I said nothing about the incident at my home. I showed them the original photos from the swamp, but held back the one that showed the figure watching me. Something told me they wouldn't believe it, that it would undermine my credibility for what was to come. We drove in 2 vehicles, Rebecca with me in my truck, the deputies following in their patrol car. The journey back to my original campsite was tense, with Rebecca peppering me with questions about what I'd experienced while I tried to focus on retracing my route accurately. When we reached the clearing where I'd camped, I was surprised to find it undisturbed. No signs that anyone or anything had visited in the day since I'd left. This gave me a small measure of confidence as I led the group toward the location of the killed deer and smashed cameras. But when we arrived at the spot, I stopped short in confusion. The area looked completely different from how I'd left it. There was no sign of the trampled vegetation, no deer carcass, no evidence of my destroyed cameras. The ground was undisturbed, covered with a layer of leaves and pine needles that didn't even show our own footprints from moments before. "I don't understand," I muttered, turning in a circle. "It was right here. The deer was right here, and my cameras were set up there, and there." I pointed to trees that showed no sign of ever having had cameras attached to them. Deputy Grimes gave me a look that mixed skepticism with concern. Mr. Williams, are you sure this is the right location? These swamps can all look pretty similar if you're not familiar with them. I'm sure, I insisted, pulling out my GPS unit. These are the exact coordinates I recorded. The deputy shrugged. Well, there's nothing here now. No deer, no cameras, no signs of any disturbance. I looked to Rebecca for support, but she seemed as confused as the deputies. Could someone have cleaned it up? She suggested. Maybe whoever or whatever did this came back and removed the evidence? Deputy Wilcox snorted. Cleaned up so thoroughly that they replaced the ground cover and erased all traces? In one day? Not likely. I felt a creeping sense of doubt. Had I somehow recorded the wrong coordinates? Was I losing my mind? No. The photos proved what I'd seen. The cave, I said suddenly. I'll take you to the cave. That will prove I'm not making this up. Despite their growing skepticism, the deputies agreed to continue. I led them on what I was certain was the same path I'd followed the day before, tracking the strange footprints to the cave entrance. But after an hour of increasingly frustrated searching, we found nothing resembling the rocky outcropping or cave I'd discovered. Mr. Williams, Deputy Grimes finally said, checking his watch, we've given this a fair shot, but we've been wandering out here for over an hour with nothing to show for it. Unless you can take us directly to something concrete, we're going to have to call this off. I could feel my credibility slipping away with each passing minute. Even Rebecca was looking at me differently now, her initial excitement replaced by uncertainty. In desperation, I pulled out my phone and showed them the photographs again. The footprints, the killed deer, the cave interior with its bones and artifacts. I took these yesterday, I insisted, right here in this area. This is real. Deputy Wilcox examined the photos closely, then handed the phone back with a frown. These could have been taken anywhere, Mr. Williams, or they could be doctored, without the actual location to verify them against. His words trailed off, the implication clear. They thought I was either lying or delusional. As we stood there in the growing tension, a sound cut through the swamp, a long, mournful howl that didn't belong to any wolf or coyote native to the region. It was deeper, more resonant, with an almost human quality that made my skin crawl. And it was close. All four of us froze, heads turning toward the source of the sound. What the hell was that? Deputy Wilcox whispered, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Before anyone could answer, another howl responded from the opposite direction, then another from somewhere behind us. We were surrounded. We need to move, I said urgently. Back to the vehicles. Now! For once, no one argued. We began retracing our steps, moving as quickly as the difficult terrain would allow, the deputies with their hands on their weapons, all of us scanning the trees and undergrowth around us. The swamp had gone silent again. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our breathing and footsteps on the soft ground. We had covered perhaps half the distance back to the clearing when Deputy Wilcox, who was bringing up the rear, let out a startled cry. We turned to see him pointing at the ground behind us. Look, he exclaimed. There, perfectly visible in a patch of mud, was one of the strange footprints I'd photographed the day before, elongated with claw marks extending from the toes. And it hadn't been there when we'd passed minutes earlier. Deputy Grimes crouched to examine it, his expression hardening. Everybody stay close, he ordered, drawing his sidearm. Something's tracking us. We continued moving. Faster now, the mood shifting from skepticism to genuine concern. Twice more we heard howls, each time closer than before. Then came the sounds of movement through the undergrowth, paralleling our path just out of sight, exactly as I'd experienced on my first visit. We were perhaps a quarter mile from the clearing when we heard a scream from behind us. A horrible, gurgling cry cut suddenly short. We turned to find Deputy Wilcox missing. He had fallen behind without any of us noticing. Wilcox! Grimes shouted, pointing his weapon toward where the sound had come from. Alan, answer me. Silence. Deputy Grimes keyed his radio, calling for backup and reporting an officer down, potential hostile situation. The response was a burst of static. He tried again with the same result. We were cut off. We have to go back for him, Grimes said, his face pale but determined. No, I countered. Whatever took him, that's what it wants. We need to get to the vehicles. Get help. Grimes hesitated, torn between duty to his partner and the reality of our situation. Finally, he nodded grimly. Stay between me and Mr. Williams, he told Rebecca. Move fast, but stay quiet. We continued toward the clearing, moving as silently as possible while maintaining our pace. The sounds of pursuit grew more obvious. Branches snapping, undergrowth rustling, occasionally a low growl that raised the hair on my neck. Whatever was following us wasn't bothering to conceal itself anymore. When the clearing finally came into view, with our vehicles still parked where we'd left them, I felt a momentary surge of hope. We were going to make it. We would escape, bring back reinforcements, proper equipment. Then Deputy Grimes, who had taken the lead, stopped so suddenly that Rebecca and I nearly ran into him. Sweet Jesus, he whispered. Standing between us and the vehicles was a figure that matched what I'd captured in my photograph. But in daylight, fully visible, it was far more terrifying. It stood on two legs like a man, but was nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark brown fur matted with what looked horribly like dried blood. Its proportions were a nightmarish blend of human and wolf, powerful shoulders and chest tapering to a narrower waist. Arms too long for its torso ending in hands that were halfway to paws, with curved, yellowed claws extending inches beyond the fingertips. But it was the face that froze my blood. A wolf's muzzle and fangs combined with disturbingly human eyes, intelligent and filled with malice. Those eyes locked with mine, and I knew with gut-wrenching certainty that this thing recognized me from the night before, that it had followed me home, that it had left the rabbit as a message. Deputy Grimes raised his weapon. "Don't move!" he shouted, his voice surprisingly steady given the circumstances. "Stay where you are." The creature's response was a snarl that exposed yellowed fangs, followed by a sound that approximated laughter. A horrible grating noise that had no place coming from an animal's throat. Then it dropped to all fours and charged. Grimes fired 1, 2, 3 shots in rapid succession. The creature jerked as at least 2 bullets found their mark, but it didn't fall. It didn't even slow down. In seconds, it crossed the distance between us and slammed into the deputy with the force of a truck, carrying him to the ground. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. Rebecca screamed as the creature tore into Grimes with tooth and claw, the deputy's own screams turning to gurgles as his throat was ripped open. I stood paralyzed, unable to process the brutality unfolding before me, until Rebecca grabbed my arm. "Run!" she shouted, pulling me toward the vehicles. We sprinted across the clearing, the sounds of the creature feeding providing a horrific backdrop to our flight. I fumbled with my keys as we reached my truck, finally getting the door unlocked and practically throwing Rebecca inside before running around to the driver's side. As I slid behind the wheel, I looked back across the clearing. The creature had abandoned what remained of Deputy Grimes and was watching us, its muzzle and chest dark with blood. Our eyes met again, and the intelligence I saw there terrified me more than its strength or speed. This thing was calculating, patient. It knew we couldn't escape. I started the engine and threw the truck into reverse, backing rapidly onto the dirt road that led away from the clearing. As we pulled away, the creature made no move to follow. It simply watched us go, and somehow that was more frightening than if it had pursued us. I drove like a madman, navigating the rough back roads at dangerous speeds. Rebecca beside me alternating between sobbing and frantically trying to get a signal on her phone. We were miles away before she finally got through to 911 and reported what had happened. The rest of that day passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and repeated questioning. We told the truth about what we'd seen, about the creature that had killed deputies Grimes and Wilcox. No one openly accused us of lying, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes, hear it in their carefully phrased questions. A search party was organized to recover the bodies and hunt for the predator. They avoided the word creature or anything that might imply they believed our description. Rebecca and I weren't included, instead being escorted back to Jacksonville to provide formal statements at the sheriff's headquarters. By nightfall, the search party had returned with grim news. They had found what remained of both deputies, but the condition of the bodies defied explanation. According to the preliminary report, both men had been partially consumed. Certain organs had been removed with what the medical examiner described as surgical precision, while other parts of the body showed savage animal-like attacks. No tracks had been found apart from our own and those of the deputies. No evidence of any large predator, normal or otherwise. The working theory became that they had been killed by a person or persons unknown, with the animal mutilations performed post-mortem to disguise the true nature of the crimes or possibly as part of some ritualistic practice. Rebecca and I were treated as witnesses, not suspects, but the unspoken sentiment was clear. Our story about a werewolf-like creature was either a shared delusion brought on by the trauma of witnessing the murders, or a fabrication to cover something we didn't want to reveal. They released us late that night with instructions not to leave town. I drove Rebecca home, both of us shell-shocked and silent. As I pulled up to her apartment building, she finally spoke. "It's going to come for us," she said softly. "You know that, right? It's not going to stop." I had no answer for her, no words of comfort or reassurance, because I knew she was right. When I arrived at my own house, I went straight to my computer and transferred all the photos from my phone and camera to multiple storage devices. I uploaded copies to secure cloud storage and emailed the most important ones to both Rebecca and myself at several different email addresses. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence that couldn't be easily erased. I spent that night barricaded in my bedroom, a loaded shotgun beside me, a weapon I'd owned for years but never thought I would need to use. Every sound from outside sent adrenaline coursing through my system, but dawn arrived without incident, and I finally fell into an exhausted sleep. The next few days established a pattern. During daylight hours, I ventured out cautiously, giving statements to investigators, meeting with Rebecca to compare notes and theories, researching anything I could find about similar incidents or folklore that might explain what we'd encountered. As sunset approached, I would return home, secure all doors and windows, and wait through the long night with weapons ready. The police search for the killer continued, but with decreasing intensity as days passed without new developments. Rebecca and I were advised to avoid discussing the case with the media, a direction we initially followed while continuing our own investigation in private. What we discovered was disturbing. Over the past 50 years, there had been at least a dozen clusters of disappearances and unusual deaths in and around the Okefenokee Swamp. Each cluster consisted of 3 to 7 victims over a period of 2 to 3 weeks, after which the incidents would stop completely for several years before starting again. The cases were seldom connected by authorities, attributed to various causes: alligator attacks, accidental drownings, hikers getting lost, even serial killers in a few instances. But Rebecca found a pattern. The clusters always began in late October and ended by mid-November. They always centered around the same general area of the swamp. And in several cases, witnesses reported seeing an unusual animal before disappearing themselves. We were in the middle of such a cluster right now. Beside the 2 deputies, 3 other people had gone missing in the area over the previous 2 weeks. A pair of campers and a local man who hunted in the swamp regularly. None of their bodies had been recovered. On the 5th night after our encounter in the swamp, I received a phone call from Rebecca just after sunset. She was speaking quickly, her voice tense with excitement or fear. I couldn't tell which. "I found something," she said without preamble. "In the university library archives, an account from 1887, a trapper who claimed he discovered a cult in the Okefenokee that was transforming men into beasts through some kind of ritual sacrifice. He described a cave with markings that match what you photographed." "Did anyone believe him?" I asked. "No," she replied. "He was dismissed as a drunk and a storyteller. But Carter, he disappeared 3 days after giving his statement to a local newspaper. And get this, it was early November when he vanished." I felt a chill run through me. "Rebecca, where are you right now?" "At home," she said. "I've got all the documents spread out over my living room floor." I think if we cross-reference these with... A crash interrupted her, followed by the sound of breaking glass. "Rebecca?" I called into the phone. "What was that?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, tight with fear. "Someone's trying to break in. My sliding glass door just shattered." "Call 911, I urged her. "Right now. I'm on my way." I was already moving, grabbing my keys and the shotgun. "I don't think it's a person," she whispered. "Oh God, I can see it. It's..." The call ended abruptly. I tried calling back as I ran to my truck, but there was no answer. I called 911 myself, reporting a break-in at Rebecca's address, then drove there as fast as I dared, running red lights and taking corners at dangerous speeds. I arrived at her apartment complex at almost the same time as the first police car. We rushed to her unit together, myself and two officers who looked wary at the shotgun I carried, but didn't tell me to put it down, given the emergency nature of the call. We found Rebecca's apartment door ajar, the frame splintered where it had been forced open. The officers drew their weapons and entered first, calling out their presence as they swept through the darkened rooms. I followed close behind, the shotgun heavy in my trembling hands. The living room was a scene of chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and a large pool of blood by the shattered sliding glass door that led to her small balcony. The officers radioed for backup and medical assistance, but I already knew it was too late. Rebecca was gone. What followed were hours of police questioning, crime scene technicians collecting evidence, and a growing sense of helplessness as I tried to convince the authorities of what we were truly facing. They found drag marks leading from the blood pool to the balcony edge, suggesting Rebecca had been pulled out that way from a third-floor apartment. No human could have done this, I insisted to the detective in charge, and no normal animal could have climbed up to her balcony. But they were already constructing their narrative. A deranged killer, possibly the same one responsible for the deputies' deaths, now targeting witnesses. When I mentioned the creature again, the detective gave me a look that bordered on pity. "Mr. Williams," he said quietly, "trauma affects people in different ways. What you think you saw in the swamp, I know what I saw," I snapped, "and now it has Rebecca." They assigned a patrol car to watch my house that night, ostensibly for my protection, but more likely to monitor my movements. I didn't care. I spent the night poring over the research Rebecca had mentioned on the phone, which the police had collected as evidence but provided me copies of upon my insistence. The trapper's account from 1887 was more detailed than Rebecca had indicated. He described finding a cave in the swamp where a group of men performed rituals involving human sacrifice, consuming specific organs to take on animal attributes. According to his account, the transformations weren't permanent at first. The men could shift between forms, but with each kill, the beast became more dominant, eventually taking over completely. Most disturbing was his description of a cycle. The transformations reached their peak during the hunter's moon, after which the fully transformed beast would retreat deep into the swamp until the following year. The trapper's final entry, dated November 3rd, 1887, stated his intention to destroy the cave and the cult. He was never seen again. The current lunar cycle matched. We were 3 days from the full moon, the hunter's moon. I spent that night researching werewolf legends, focusing on alleged weaknesses and methods of killing such creatures. The traditional silver bullet appeared consistently across cultures, though the scientific part of my brain rejected such supernatural solutions. Yet what I had seen defied scientific explanation. The next morning, I visited a specialty metals dealer and purchased several ounces of pure silver, along with casting equipment. I had no experience making bullets, but desperation drove me to try. My first attempts were crude, but by evening I had created 6 silver slugs that would fit my shotgun. That night, the creature came for me. I was in my garage finishing the last silver slug when I heard a scratching at the side door. The patrol car was visible through the front windows, the officer inside presumably unaware of what lurked on the other side of my home. I reached for the shotgun, loaded with regular shells as the silver ones weren't yet ready. The scratching stopped, followed by a low, rumbling growl that raised the hair on my neck. Then, horrifyingly, a voice, raspy and distorted, barely human, but unmistakably forming words. "Carter." It pronounced my name with difficulty, as if speaking through a mouth not designed for human speech. "Carter!" I raised the shotgun, pointing it at the door, my hands shaking so badly I feared I couldn't aim properly. "You cannot hide," the voice continued, each word sounding torn from an unwilling throat. "You cannot run." The door handle began to turn slowly. I fired through the door, the blast deafening in the confined space of the garage. A howl of pain answered, followed by the sound of something heavy moving away rapidly. By the time the police officer reached my garage, weapon drawn and shouting questions, whatever had been there was gone, leaving behind only deep gouges in the metal door and a small splash of dark blood on the concrete. The officer called for backup, clearly shaken by what he'd seen, but still attempting to maintain a rational explanation. "Someone tried to break in," he insisted. "You scared them off." I didn't argue. I finished casting the silver slugs while a group of officers searched the surrounding area, finding nothing. When they left, the patrol outside my house had been doubled to 2 cars. I spent that night in a hotel under a false name, not trusting that even the police presence would deter the creature. I took the silver shells with me, now loaded in the shotgun and secured in a guitar case to avoid suspicion. The following day, I made my decision. Waiting for the creature to come for me meant fighting on its terms. I needed to take the fight to it, to find its lair in daylight when it might be at its weakest. The cave I'd discovered had been real, regardless of whether the search party had been able to find it again. That's where I would go. I evaded the police surveillance with embarrassing ease, simply walking 2 blocks from the hotel and calling a rideshare to take me to a car rental agency. By mid-morning, I was driving a nondescript sedan toward the Ocefenokee Swamp, the shotgun hidden beneath a blanket in the trunk. This time, I approached from a different direction, parking at a public boat launch several miles from where I'd previously entered. I rented a small motorboat, telling the attendant I was a birdwatcher looking to photograph herons in the less trafficked areas of the swamp. With a detailed map, GPS unit, and the shotgun now concealed in a long equipment bag, I set out into the maze of waterways. I had studied satellite imagery of the area, identifying several possible locations for the rocky outcropping that housed the cave. Most were in areas too densely vegetated to be visible from above, but I had marked them all as potential targets. The autumn sun shone down on the swamp, burning away the morning mist and illuminating a landscape of breathtaking beauty that belied the horror lurking within it. I navigated carefully, stopping occasionally to check my bearings and listen. The swamp was alive with normal sounds. Birds calling, insects buzzing, the occasional splash of a fish or turtle. It was nothing like the unnatural silence I'd experienced during my previous encounters with the creature. By early afternoon, I had checked 3 of my marked locations without success. The 4th, however, showed promise, a subtle rise in the otherwise flat terrain, with exposed rock visible through the trees. I secured the boat to a cypress knee and proceeded on foot, moving as quietly as possible while maintaining awareness of my surroundings. I found the cave entrance not on the rocky outcropping itself, but hidden behind it, concealed by a curtain of hanging moss and vines. It matched my memory exactly, the low opening requiring me to duck, the narrow passage leading to a larger chamber. This time, however, I was prepared, with a powerful flashlight in one hand and the shotgun in the other. The chamber beyond was as I remembered it, the circular space, the worked walls with their ancient markings, the central depression in the floor. But now there were differences. The bones and personal effects I'd seen before had been rearranged and new items added. A woman's watch I recognized as Rebecca's, a police badge that undoubtedly belonged to one of the deputies. Most disturbing was a fresh kill laid out beside the central depression, a deer, its chest cavity opened and emptied of organs. The blood was still tacky, not fully dried. The creature had been here recently. I photographed everything with my phone, moving carefully around the chamber. In the far corner, I discovered a narrower passage leading deeper into the earth. It hadn't been there during my first visit, or perhaps it had been concealed behind the pile of bones that now lay scattered across the floor. Logic told me to retreat, to take my evidence to the authorities and return with armed officers. But I knew how that would end. The cave would disappear again, the evidence would vanish, and more people would die while the police constructed rational explanations for the unexplainable. I switched the regular shells in my shotgun for the silver ones and entered the passage. The tunnel descended steeply, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. The walls here showed fewer signs of human workmanship, appearing more naturally formed. After perhaps 50 yards, the passage opened into a much larger cavern, and I stopped short, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The space was vast, at least 60 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above the reach of my flashlight. Scattered throughout were stone columns that appeared to be natural formations, some broken, others reaching from floor to ceiling. The ground was uneven, with pools of still water reflecting the beam of my light. But it was what lay in the center of the cavern that froze my blood. A raised stone platform, clearly shaped by tools, supported what could only be described as an altar. Around it, arranged in a precise circular pattern, were 7 stone chairs. Thrones, really, carved from the living rock and adorned with symbols similar to those in the upper chamber. 5 of the thrones were occupied. At first, I thought they held statues, crude representations of hybrid creatures, part man and part wolf. Then one of them moved, head turning slightly in my direction, and I realized with horror that they were alive, or at least partially alive. They appeared to be caught in some state between human and beast, their bodies mostly humanoid but covered in patchy fur, their faces elongated into partial muzzles, their hands tipped with claws. They sat unnaturally still, eyes open but seemingly unseeing, as if in a trance or suspended animation. I recognized one of them with a shock of revulsion. Despite the partial transformation, I could still see features that belonged to Michael Krantz, the man whose wallet I'd found in the upper cave. Beside him sat a female figure that might once have been Elaine Chambers. The others I didn't recognize, but their partially transformed state told me all I needed to know. These were the missing victims, caught in some nightmarish metamorphosis. And then I understood the true horror of what I was witnessing. There were 7 thrones, but only 5 were occupied. The trapper's account mentioned a cult of 7. 2 more transformations were yet to be completed. Rebecca would be one, and I was intended to be the other. As this realization dawned, a low growl echoed through the cavern behind me. I spun around, raising the shotgun, to find the creature standing at the passage entrance, blocking my only escape route. In the confined space of the cave, it appeared even larger than before, a towering mass of muscle and fur that radiated malevolence. Its eyes fixed on me with terrifying intelligence, and its muzzle pulled back in what might have been a smile, exposing yellowed fangs. "You came to us," it rasped in that horrible approximation of human speech, "as we knew you would." I aimed the shotgun at his chest. "Where's Rebecca?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The creature made that awful laughing sound again. "Becoming," it said, gesturing toward the thrones with one clawed hand. "As you will." "I don't think so," I replied and pulled the trigger. The silver slug struck the creature square in the chest, the impact driving it back a step. It looked down at the wound in what seemed like surprise, as dark blood oozed from the entry point. Then it raised its head, those intelligent eyes now burning with fury, in charge. I fired again, the second slug catching it in the shoulder, spinning it halfway around. But it recovered with frightening speed, closing the distance between us before I could chamber a third round. A massive clawed hand struck the shotgun, sending it flying from my grasp and clattering across the stone floor. I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe that would have disemboweled me, and scrambled behind one of the stone columns. The creature pursued, moving with a speed that belied its bulk, forcing me into a desperate game of hide-and-seek among the columns. "Cannot escape," it growled as it stalked me. 7 must complete. Cycle must continue. I had no weapons now beyond my wits and whatever I could find in the cavern. As I ducked behind another column, my foot struck something solid, a length of broken stone that had fallen from one of the damaged columns. I grabbed it, hefting its reassuring weight. When the creature rounded the column, I swung with all my strength, connecting solidly with its head. The impact sent a shock up my arms, and the makeshift club shattered, but the creature staggered back, momentarily dazed. I used that moment to run for the shotgun, still lying where it had fallen near the altar. I reached it just as the creature recovered, charging toward me with a roar of rage. I raised the weapon, chambered another silver slug, and fired at point-blank range as it reached me. The shot took it in the throat, tearing through fur and flesh and spraying dark blood across the altar. The creature reared back, clawing at the wound, a terrible gurgling sound escaping its ruined throat. But still it didn't fall. I chambered the fourth slug and fired again, the shot punching into its chest beside the first wound. This time the creature stumbled, dropping to one knee, its eyes still burning with hatred and intelligence, fixed on me as I chambered the fifth silver slug. End! Cycle! It rasped, blood foaming around its fangs. Others will come. I aimed at its head. Not if I end you all, I replied and pulled the trigger. The creature collapsed, its massive form crashing to the stone floor with a finality that echoed through the cavern. I stood over it, the shotgun still raised, watching for any sign of movement. There was none. I turned my attention to the 5 figures on the thrones. Up close, I could see that they were in various stages of transformation, some more human, others more beast-like. All were alive but unresponsive, seemingly caught in a state between consciousness and sleep. Among them I found Rebecca, the most recently taken and thus the most human-looking of the group. Her skin had begun to darken with the first growth of fur, her nails lengthening into claws, but her face was still mostly her own. "Rebecca," I called, shaking her gently. "Rebecca, can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered, focusing on me with difficulty. "Carter?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What happening to me?" "I'm getting you out of here," I promised. "All of you. I'm going to end this." I examined the others, finding that, like Rebecca, they could be roused to a state of semi-consciousness. None could walk independently. Whatever process was transforming them had left them weak and disoriented. I would need help to evacuate them. With no cell signal in the cave, I had no choice but to leave them temporarily. I promised to return quickly with assistance, then made my way back up the passage to the upper chamber, retrieving my phone to document everything I'd found. The journey back through the swamp to my boat seemed endless, every shadow appearing threatening, every sound raising my alarm. But I encountered nothing supernatural. Whatever power had hidden the cave before was no longer functioning. Perhaps it had died with the creature. When I finally reached an area with cell reception, I called not the local sheriff's department. I didn't trust them to handle this appropriately, but the state police and the FBI. I reported multiple kidnapping victims being held in the swamp, providing exact GPS coordinates and sending some of the photos as proof. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Helicopters, tactical teams, medical personnel. I led the first responders to the cave entrance, then stood aside as they secured the site and began evacuating the victims. Rebecca and the others were brought out on stretchers, loaded into medical helicopters, and flown to hospitals equipped to deal with their unusual condition. The authorities were baffled by what they found. Humans in a state of physical transformation that defied medical explanation. A cave filled with evidence of ritualistic activity spanning decades, if not centuries. And the body of a creature that appeared neither fully animal nor human. In the days that followed, scientists and specialists from various government agencies descended on the site. The official explanation began as cult activity involving extreme body modification and drug-induced hallucinations, then evolved to include references to unclassified genetic manipulation and unprecedented biological agents. Rebecca and the other victims were quarantined in a specialized medical facility, their condition monitored as doctors worked to understand and reverse the transformation process. Progress was slow but promising. The changes, without the influence of whatever force had driven them, began to slowly reverse. I was debriefed repeatedly, my story consistent, but met with obvious skepticism despite the physical evidence. No one was willing to accept the supernatural explanation, but neither could they provide a scientific one that accounted for all the facts. 3 weeks after the incident, I was allowed to visit Rebecca. The physical changes had largely reversed. Her skin was normal again, the claws receded back to human nails, but something in her eyes had changed permanently. A wildness lurked there, something primal and not entirely human. "They don't believe us," she said quietly as we sat in her hospital room, monitored by cameras and probably microphones as well, about what it really was. "No," I agreed. "They never will." It called itself the last of the 7 elders, she told me, her voice low. The original 7 who started the cycle centuries ago. It needed to complete the new circle before the hunter's moon reached its peak, or the cycle would break. I nodded, remembering the creature's final words. Others will come, I quoted. Rebecca's eyes met mine, that wild look intensifying. It wasn't lying, Carter. This wasn't the only circle. There are others in other places. Other creatures, other caves. The cycle is ancient, and it's wider than we know. I wanted to dismiss her words as trauma-induced paranoia or the lingering effects of whatever had been done to her. But I had seen too much, experienced too much to simply disregard the warning. Then we'll be ready, I said, taking her hand. Her nails dug into my palm, just slightly sharper than human nails should be. 1 month later, Rebecca and the other victims were released from medical supervision, declared fully recovered despite ongoing psychological issues that the doctors attributed to PTSD. The case was officially closed, classified as an instance of extreme cult activity, with the creature explained away as a genetically modified animal used to terrorize victims. I knew better. We all did. I've spent the months since then building a network, connecting with others who have experienced similar encounters across the country and beyond, gathering information, preparing. Rebecca heads our research division, her mind sharper than ever even as she struggles with certain changes that the doctors couldn't fully reverse. The hunter's moon will return next year, and we will be watching the dark places of the world, the forgotten caves and shadowed forests where ancient cycles turn, and creatures wait that have no place in the rational world we pretend to inhabit. Because now I know the truth that lurks beneath the surface of our comfortable reality. There are things in this world older and more terrible than humanity likes to admit. Things that wear human faces until the moon calls them to reveal their true nature. And I know with a certainty that chills my blood even now, that somewhere in the darkness, eyes are watching, waiting, hungry. The cycle was broken in the Akafeniki, but elsewhere, in places I have yet to find, others continue. The hunt has only just begun.